A scream pierces the quiet of Honeysuckle Lane, shattering the calm of a sleepy village where secrets hide behind every curtain. Welcome to Miss Marple and the Murder on Honeysuckle Lane, a tale of mystery and cunning that'll keep you guessing. Grab a cup of tea, take a seat, and dive into this gripping story. If you're hooked, hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us. Chapter 1. The village awakens. The morning sun spills over Honeysuckle Lane, painting the cobblestone path in golden hues. St. Mary Mead, a quaint English village, hums with the gentle rhythm of daily life. Milk bottles clink on doorsteps, sparrows chirp in the hedgerows, and the scent of fresh bread wafts from the bakery. But beneath this serene surface, something sinister brews. Miss Jane Marple, our sharp-eyed sleuth, sits by her window, knitting needles clicking softly, her mind as keen as ever. She's no stranger to the village's secrets, having unravelled many a mystery from her cosy cottage. Today, though, the air feels different, heavy with an unspoken tension. This is where our story begins, in a place where everyone knows everyone, yet no one truly knows what lies in their neighbour's heart. Let's dive into the world of St. Mary Mead and the curious events that are about to unfold. Miss Marple, a silver-haired spinster with a knack for noticing what others miss, has lived in St. Mary Mead her entire life. Her cottage, nestled at the end of Honeysuckle Lane, is a hub of quiet observation. She's not your typical detective. No badge, no gun, just a mind that pieces together human nature like a jigsaw puzzle. The villagers adore her, though some find her nosy. Just a harmless old lady, they say, but they're wrong. Miss Marple's eyes miss nothing. A glance, a hesitation, a misplaced word. This morning, as she sips her tea, she notices something odd. The milkman, young Tommy Pierce, is late. Usually his whistle echoes down the lane by 7, but it's nearly 8, and there's no sign of him. Miss Marple frowns, her needles pausing. It's a small thing, but small things matter in St. Mary Mead. Across the lane, the vicarage buzzes with its own routine. Reverend Clement, a kind but distracted man, is preparing his Sunday sermon, while his wife Griselda plans a tea party for the village ladies. Their maid, Mary, a sullen girl with a sharp tongue, is scrubbing the kitchen floor, muttering about her workload. Next door, at Rose Cottage, Mrs. Price, the village gossip, is already peering through her curtains, eager for something to share at the tea party. The bakery, owned by Mr. and Mrs. Baker, is bustling, with their daughter Elsie serving customers with a distracted air. And then there's the newcomer, Mr. Redding, a charming artist who moved into Lilac Cottage a month ago. His flashy car and city manners have set tongues wagging, especially among the younger women. Everyone in St. Mary Mead plays a role, but who's hiding something? Miss Marple's instincts tell her the village's peace is about to shatter. As the clock ticks toward 9, a piercing scream cuts through the village. It comes from the direction of the bakery. Miss Marple sets her knitting aside, her heart quickening. She steps outside, joining a small crowd gathering near the bakery's back alley. There, sprawled on the ground, lies Tommy Pierce, the milkman. His eyes are wide open, lifeless, a broken milk bottle beside him. A thin trickle of blood stains the cobblestones. Gasps ripple through the crowd. Mrs. Baker, pale as flour, clutches her apron. "He was just here delivering milk," she whispers. Constable Hurst, the village policeman, arrives, his face grim. "Stay back, everyone," he orders. But Miss Marple lingers, her sharp eyes scanning the scene. The broken bottle, the angle of Tommy's body, the faint scuff marks in the dirt. They tell a story, one she's determined to read. The villagers buzz with shock and speculation. Tommy was a cheeky lad, always joking, sometimes too bold for his own good. Had he crossed someone? Miss Marple overhears Mrs. Price whispering to Griselda about Tommy's flirtations with Elsie Baker. "That boy was trouble," Mrs. Price says, her voice low, "always hanging around where he shouldn't." Griselda nods, but her eyes dart nervously to the vicarage. Miss Marple files this away. She knows gossip is like a tangled thread. Pull gently, and it unravels. For now, she returns to her cottage, her mind already working. Who was in the alley this morning? Why was Tommy late? And what about that broken bottle? Was it an accident or something more deliberate? This first chapter sets the stage for our mystery. We've met Miss Marple, our unlikely heroine, and glimpsed the village of St. Mary Mead, where secrets simmer beneath the surface. Tommy's death is no simple mishap, and Miss Marple knows it. As she sips her tea and resumes her knitting, her mind is already piecing together the clues. The village is awake now, but not in the way it expected. Something dark has taken root on Honeysuckle Lane, and Miss Marple is ready to dig it out. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where the investigation deepens and the villagers' secrets begin to surface. Chapter 2. Shadows in the Alley. The sun climbs higher over St. Mary Mead, but the warmth does little to dispel the chill that has settled over Honeysuckle Lane. The bakery alley, now roped off by Constable Hurst, is a hive of hushed whispers and curious glances. Miss Jane Marple, back in her cottage, sets her tea aside and peers through her lace curtains. The village is rattled, but she knows the answers lie in the details, the ones everyone else overlooks. Today, she's determined to start unraveling the mystery of Tommy Pierce's death. The broken milk bottle, the scuff marks in the dirt, and the faint unease in the villagers' eyes are pieces of a puzzle she's eager to solve. Let's follow her as she steps into the heart of the investigation, where shadows hide more than just secrets. Miss Marple slips on her coat and heads toward the bakery, her steps measured but purposeful. The crowd has thinned, but a few villagers linger, their faces a mix of fear and fascination. Constable Hurst, a burly man with a slow drawl, is scribbling notes in a worn notebook. He's diligent but lacks imagination, Miss Marple thinks. She approaches him, her smile disarming. "Such a dreadful thing, Constable," she says softly. "Have you noticed anything unusual?" Hurst shrugs, muttering about waiting for the coroner from the nearby town. But Miss Marple's eyes are drawn to the alley's edge, where a narrow path leads to the back gardens of Lilac Cottage and Rose Cottage. A single daisy crushed into the dirt catches her attention. It's out of place, too delicate for the rough alley. She tucks this observation away, knowing it might mean nothing or everything. At the bakery, Mrs. Baker is behind the counter, her hands trembling as she wraps loaves for customers. Her husband, Mr. Baker, a stout man with flour-dusted arms, is unusually quiet, his eyes fixed on the floor. Their daughter, Elsie, serves a customer with a forced smile, but her hands fumble with the change. Miss Marple steps inside, the bell above the door jingling. "Good morning, Mrs. Baker," she says kindly. "I heard about poor Tommy. You must be shaken." Mrs. Baker nods, her lips tight. "He was in and out so fast this morning," she says. "Delivered the milk, said he was running late and left. Next thing, we heard the scream." Miss Marple notes the word late again. Why was Tommy rushing? And who screamed first? She decides to visit Lilac Cottage, home of Mr. Redding, the artist whose arrival has stirred the village. His garden backs onto the alley, and Miss Marple wonders if he saw anything. She knocks on his door, and after a moment Mr. Redding appears, paint smudged on his cheek, his dark hair tousled. He's all charm, offering her a seat and a glass of lemonade. "Terrible business about the milkman," he says, his voice smooth. "I was painting in my studio all morning. Didn't see a thing." His studio, Miss Marple notes, has a window overlooking the alley. She asks casually about his morning, and he describes mixing paints and sketching a landscape. But his eyes flicker when she mentions the alley, and she spots a speck of dirt on his otherwise pristine shoes. It's not much, but it's enough to make her wonder. Next, Miss Marple visits Rose Cottage, where Mrs. Price, the village gossip, is eager to talk. Over a cup of overly sweet tea, Mrs. Price leans in, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "That Tommy was always trouble," she says. "I saw him arguing with Elsie Baker yesterday, right outside the bakery. Looked heated." Miss Marple listens, her face neutral, but her mind races. An argument? About what? Mrs. Price, relishing the attention, adds, And that Mr. Redding, he's too charming for his own good, always sketching in that garden of his, watching everyone. Miss Marple thanks her and leaves, her thoughts turning to Elsie. The girl's nervous demeanour at the bakery suggests she knows more than she's letting on. Back on Honeysuckle Lane, Miss Marple pauses by the vicarage, where Griselda is tending her roses. The vicar's wife looks pale, her hands unsteady as she clips a stem. "Jane, isn't it awful?" Griselda says, her voice trembling. "Poor Tommy, he was such a lively boy." Miss Marple nods, then gently asks if Griselda saw anything unusual this morning. Griselda hesitates, her eyes darting to the vicarage. "I was in the kitchen with Mary," she says. "We heard the scream, but, well, it's all so confusing." Miss Marple senses Griselda's unease but doesn't press. Instead, she notes the vicarage's proximity to the alley, close enough for someone to slip out unnoticed. As evening falls, Miss Marple returns to her cottage, her mind buzzing. The crushed daisy, Mr. Redding's dirty shoes, Elsie's nervousness, Mrs. Price's gossip, Griselda's hesitation. They're all threads in a tapestry she's beginning to weave. She sits by her fire, knitting forgotten, and thinks about Tommy. He was late, rushed, perhaps distracted. Was he running from something or someone? And that scream, who did it come from? The village is holding its breath, and Miss Marple knows the truth is buried in the shadows of that alley. She'll need to tread carefully, for St. Mary Mead is full of secrets, and someone is watching her just as closely as she's watching them. This chapter has pulled us deeper into the mystery, with Miss Marple's keen observations revealing new layers. The village is no longer just a sleepy hamlet, it's a web of motives and hidden glances. As she pieces together the clues, the tension grows. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where Miss Marple digs into Tommy's past and uncovers a surprising connection that tightens the noose around Honeysuckle Lane. Chapter 3. Threads of the Past. The evening settles over St. Mary Mead like a heavy blanket, the air thick with the scent of honeysuckle and unspoken questions. Miss Jane Marple sits by her fire, the glow casting shadows on her cottage walls. Her knitting lies untouched as her mind sifts through the day's discoveries. The crushed daisy, Mr. Redding's fleeting glance, Elsie's nervous hands, Griselda's hesitation. Each clue is a stitch in a pattern, but the full design eludes her. Tommy Pierce's death is no accident, and Miss Marple knows the key to unravelling it lies in his past. Who was this cheeky milkman, and what did he stir up in the village? Tonight, she sets out to trace the threads of Tommy's life, pulling her deeper into the secrets of Honeysuckle Lane. Miss Marple begins her evening with a visit to the village pub, the Blue Boar, where Tommy often lingered after his rounds. The pub is a cosy, dimly lit place, its wooden beams polished by years of laughter and gossip. She settles at a corner table, her presence barely noticed by the regulars. The barkeep, Mr. Gibbs, a wiry man with a quick grin, is wiping glasses when she beckons him over. "A sad day for Tommy," she says, her voice soft but probing. Gibbs nods, his grin fading. "Aye, he was a good lad mostly. Always had a story to tell, that one." Miss Marple leans in, asking about Tommy's habits. Gibbs reveals Tommy was a charmer, always joking with the barmaids, but lately he'd been quieter, nursing his pint in the corner. "Seemed worried," Gibbs adds, "like he owed someone something." This piques Miss Marple's interest. Debts, she knows, can be deadly. She asks if Tommy mentioned anyone specific. Gibbs hesitates, then mentions seeing Tommy talking to Mr. Redding a week ago, their heads bent close in the pub's back booth. "Didn't look friendly," Gibbs says, scratching his chin. Miss Marple thanks him and steps into the cool night, her mind turning to the artist. Mr. Redding's charm is a mask, she suspects, but what lies beneath? She decides to learn more about Tommy's connections, starting with the bakery, where whispers of an argument with Elsie linger. The next morning, Miss Marple visits the village school, where Tommy's younger sister, Annie, is a student. The schoolmistress, Miss Hartnell, a stern woman with a soft spot for gossip, welcomes her. Over tea in the cramped staff room, Miss Marple steers the conversation to Tommy. He was a bright boy, Miss Hartnell says, but wild. Left school at 16 to work as a milkman, always chasing quick money. She lowers her voice, adding, "He was sweet on Elsie Baker, you know. Followed her like a puppy, but she's been distant lately." Miss Marple nods, recalling Mrs. Price's mention of an argument. Was Elsie rejecting Tommy, or was there more to their falling out? Leaving the school, Miss Marple heads to the village post office, a hub of local chatter. Mrs. Cleet, the postmistress, is sorting letters, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Miss Marple buys a stamp and casually asks about Tommy. Mrs. Cleet's lips purse. "That boy was always delivering more than milk," she says, cryptically. Pressed further, she reveals Tommy often carried notes between villagers, messages not meant for prying eyes. "He'd grin and say it was just favours, but I saw him slip a letter to Mr. Redding once, and another to Mary at the vicarage." Miss Marple's pulse quickens. Tommy, a courier of secrets? This could explain his unease, his debts, perhaps even his death. Determined to follow this lead, Miss Marple visits the vicarage, where Mary, the maid, is polishing silver in the dining room. Mary's sullen demeanour hardens when Miss Marple mentions Tommy. "He was nosy," Mary snaps, her cloth moving faster, always poking into things that weren't his business. Miss Marple notes the girl's flushed cheeks and asks if Tommy ever brought her letters. Mary freezes, then mumbles, "Maybe once or twice, nothing important." But her eyes dart to the window, and Miss Marple senses she's struck a nerve. Did Tommy know something about Mary that made her nervous? Or was he delivering messages that put him in danger? As noon approaches, Miss Marple strolls past Lilac Cottage, where Mr. Redding is painting in his garden. She pauses, pretending to admire his roses. "Your garden is lovely," she says, her tone light. Redding smiles, but it doesn't reach his eyes. She mentions Tommy casually, noting his role as the village milkman. Redding's brush pauses mid-stroke. "Poor lad," he says. "I barely knew him." But Miss Marple catches a fleeting tension in his jaw. She thanks him and leaves, her mind racing. Redding's studio overlooks the alley, and he received notes from Tommy. Could he have seen or done something that morning? Back at her cottage, Miss Marple pieces together the day's findings. Tommy was more than a milkman. He was a link between villagers, carrying their secrets in his satchel. His argument with Elsie, his tense talk with Redding, his deliveries to Mary, they all point to a web of hidden dealings. Was Tommy killed to silence him, or did he stumble into something bigger? The village feels smaller now, its familiar faces masking motives Miss Marple is only beginning to uncover. She knows she must tread lightly, for the killer is likely watching, waiting for her to get too close. The mystery deepens as Miss Marple follows Tommy's trail, each step revealing a village less innocent than it seems. In the next chapter, a surprising discovery at the bakery will tighten the threads of suspicion, pulling Miss Marple closer to the truth and the danger on Honeysuckle Lane. Chapter 4. The Bakery's Secret. The afternoon sun bathes St. Mary Mead in a deceptively peaceful glow, but the quiet of Honeysuckle Lane feels like the calm before a storm. Miss Jane Marple, her mind sharp as ever, sips tea in her cottage, piecing together the threads of Tommy Pierce's life, his secret deliveries, his argument with Elsie, his tense exchange with Mr. Redding. Each clue points to a village simmering with hidden tensions, and the bakery, where Tommy's body was found, feels like the heart of it all. Today, Miss Marple decides to return to the scene, sensing that the alley and the people tied to it hold answers she's yet to uncover. Let's follow her as she steps back into the bakery, where a startling discovery waits in the shadows. Miss Marple approaches the bakery just as the lunchtime crowd thins. The bell jingles as she enters, and the warm scent of fresh bread greets her. Mrs. Baker is at the counter, her face pale, her eyes darting nervously. Mr. Baker is in the back, kneading dough with more force than necessary. Elsie, their daughter, is nowhere in sight. Miss Marple buys a loaf of rye, using the purchase as an excuse to linger. "Such a shock about Tommy," she says gently, watching Mrs. Baker's reaction. The woman nods, her fingers twisting her apron. "It's awful," she murmurs. "Elsie's taken it hard. She's upstairs resting." Miss Marple notes the strain in her voice. Grief or something else. She asks to speak with Elsie, but Mrs. Baker hesitates, saying her daughter isn't feeling well. The refusal is polite but firm, and Miss Marple senses a wall going up. Undeterred, Miss Marple steps outside and circles to the alley, now quiet except for the faint hum of bees in nearby gardens. Constable Hurst's rope is gone, but the spot where Tommy fell is marked by a faint stain on the cobblestones. She crouches, her eyes scanning the ground. Near the bakery's back door, half hidden under a crate, she spots something glinting, a small brass key, no bigger than her thumb. It's scratched and worn, not the kind for a house or a car. She tucks it into her pocket, her mind racing. A key to what? The bakery's storage shed, a lockbox, or something more personal? She glances at the bakery's back door slightly ajar and decides to take a closer look. Slipping inside, Miss Marple finds herself in the bakery's storeroom, a dim space filled with sacks of flour and crates of supplies. The air is thick with the scent of yeast and dust. She moves quietly, her eyes adjusting to the low light. On a shelf, she notices a ledger, its pages dog-eared. Curiosity piqued, she opens it, revealing columns of numbers, orders, deliveries, payments. But one entry catches her eye. A weekly payment labelled TP for the past 3 months. Always in cash, always late at night. Tommy Pierce, Miss Marple's pulse quickens. Was he paid for more than milk deliveries? Blackmail, perhaps? She closes the ledger, memorizing the details, and slips out before anyone notices. Outside, she heads to the village hall, where old records might shed light on the key. The hall's caretaker, Mr. Dobbs, a chatty man with a limp, lets her in. She asks about local lockboxes or storage units, framing it as a question about village history. Dobbs scratches his head, mentioning a set of old lockers at the train station, long out of use but still accessible with small brass keys. "Folks used them for private business," he says, winking. Miss Marple thanks him, her mind buzzing. If Tommy had a locker, what was he hiding? She resolves to check the station later, but first, she needs to understand Elsie's role. She returns to Honeysuckle Lane and spots Elsie slipping out of the bakery's side door. Her coat pulled tight despite the warm day. Miss Marple follows at a distance, watching as Elsie hurries toward the churchyard, a secluded spot behind the vicarage. There, Elsie meets Mary, the vicarage maid, who looks agitated, her hands twisting a handkerchief. Miss Marple, hidden behind a yew tree, strains to hear. "You shouldn't have taken it," Mary hisses. Elsie shakes her head, her voice low. "I didn't mean to." He wouldn't stop asking. Their words are cryptic, but the fear in their voices is clear. They part quickly, unaware of Miss Marple's presence. She doesn't follow, but their exchange confirms her suspicions. Elsie and Mary are entangled in something, and Tommy was part of it. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sits with the brass key in her hand, turning it over. The ledger's entries, the key, Elsie's secret meeting, they all point to Tommy being more than a carefree milkman. Was he extorting someone with what he knew? Did Elsie or Mary have reason to silence him? Or is the key tied to Mr. Redding, whose studio overlooks the alley? The village feels like a chessboard, each move calculated, each player hiding their strategy. Miss Marple knows she's closer to the truth, but the danger is growing. Someone in St. Mary Mead is guarding a secret worth killing for, and she's determined to find it. The web of Honeysuckle Lane tightens as Miss Marple uncovers new clues, each one pulling her closer to the heart of the mystery. In the next chapter, a visit to the train station will reveal what Tommy was hiding, and bring Miss Marple face to face with a figure from the shadows. Chapter 5. The station's secret twilight drapes St. Mary Mead in a soft purple haze, the village settling into the quiet of evening. Miss Jane Marple, her mind alight with the day's findings, holds the small brass key she found near the bakery, its weight heavy with possibility. The ledger's cryptic payments to TP, Elsie's secretive meeting with Mary, and the whispers of Tommy's hidden dealings have drawn a map of suspicion in her mind. The key, she suspects, unlocks more than a box. It unlocks the truth about Tommy Pierce's death. Tonight, she heads to the old train station, where forgotten lockers might hold the secret that cost Tommy his life. Let's follow her into the shadows, where the past waits to be uncovered. Miss Marple pulls her shawl tight against the evening chill and walks the short distance to the station, a crumbling relic at the edge of the village. The platform is deserted, the ticket office boarded up, its faded sign barely legible. The lockers Mr. Dobbs mentioned stand against a weathered wall, their brass locks dulled by time. She counts them, 12 in all, each with a small number etched above. The key in her hand has no marking, so she begins testing it, her movements slow to avoid drawing attention. The third locker clicks open, revealing a dusty interior. Inside, she finds a small canvas bag, its contents rattling softly. Her heart quickens as she opens it, revealing a bundle of letters tied with string, a cheap pocket watch, and a folded photograph. The letters are a mix, some in Tommy's scrawled handwriting, others in unfamiliar script. One, addressed to Elsie Baker, is unopened, its edges worn as if handled often. Another, in elegant cursive, is signed L.R., Leonard Redding. Miss Marple tucks the letters into her bag, her mind racing. The photograph shows Tommy and Elsie at a village fair, laughing, her arm linked with his. But there's a third figure in the background, partially blurred. Mr. Redding, his face turned away. The pocket watch is engraved with TP, confirming it was Tommy's. Why hide these here? Was he protecting them, or using them to leverage someone? Miss Marple locks the bag away, knowing she'll need to study the letters later. As she steps onto the platform, a shadow moves near the station's edge. She freezes, her senses sharp. It's Mary, the vicarage maid, her face pale in the dim light. Miss Marple? Mary's voice is shaky. What are you doing here? Miss Marple smiles, calm as ever. Just a walk, dear. The evening's so pleasant. Mary's eyes dart to the lockers, then away. It's not safe here at night, she mutters, hurrying off. Miss Marple watches her go, noting the girl's agitation. Mary's presence at the station is no coincidence. Did she know about Tommy's locker, or is she guarding her own secret? The next morning, Miss Marple sits at her kitchen table, the letters spread before her. The one to Elsie is a love note, Tommy's words clumsy but earnest, begging her to meet him. It's dated a week before his death. Unopened. Did Elsie refuse it, or never receive it? The letter from L.R. is vaguer, mentioning a deal and warning Tommy to keep quiet. Miss Marple's thoughts turn to Mr. Redding. His charm, his studio overlooking the alley, his tense exchange with Tommy at the pub, they all point to involvement. But what was the deal? She decides to confront Elsie, hoping to loosen the girl's tongue. She finds Elsie at the bakery, sweeping the floor with distracted strokes. The shop is empty, the baker's in the back. Miss Marple wastes no time. Elsie, dear, I found something of Tommy's, she says gently, holding up the photograph. Elsie's face crumples, her broom clattering to the floor. We were friends, she whispers, but he changed. Kept asking for money, saying he knew things. Miss Marple presses softly, asking what Tommy knew. Elsie's eyes fill with tears. He saw me with someone, she says, barely audible. He wouldn't let it go. She clams up, refusing to name the someone, but Miss Marple suspects it's tied to the letters, or Mr. Redding. Later, Miss Marple visits the vicarage, hoping to gauge Mary's reaction. Griselda is out, but Mary answers the door, her sullen demeanour sharper than usual. Miss Marple mentions seeing her at the station, watching for a response. Mary's hands twist her apron. I was just walking, she says too quickly. Miss Marple nods, then casually asks about Tommy's deliveries to the vicarage. Mary's face hardens. He brought milk, that's all. But her voice wavers, and Miss Marple senses fear. Was Mary the recipient of one of Tommy's secret notes, or something more? As dusk falls, Miss Marple returns to her cottage, the letters and photograph laid out like evidence in a courtroom. Tommy was no innocent. He was meddling, perhaps blackmailing, using what he knew to squeeze money or favours. Elsie's tears, Mary's fear, Redding's letter. They all circle the same truth. Tommy's knowledge made him dangerous. The station's secret has opened a door, but it's also painted a target on Miss Marple's back. Someone in St. Mary Mead is desperate to keep their secrets buried, and she's getting too close. The mystery on Honeysuckle Lane grows darker as Miss Marple uncovers Tommy's hidden world. In the next chapter, a confrontation with Mr. Redding will reveal a shocking truth, pushing Miss Marple closer to the killer's trail and into greater danger. Chapter 6. The Artist's Mask. The morning mist clings to St. Mary Mead, wrapping Honeysuckle Lane in a ghostly veil. Miss Jane Marple sits at her kitchen table, the letters from Tommy's locker spread before her, their words echoing in her mind. The love note to Elsie, the cryptic warning from L.R., the photograph tying them to Mr. Redding, they all point to the charming artist at Lilac Cottage. His polished manners and studio overlooking the alley make him a puzzle piece that doesn't quite fit. Today, Miss Marple decides to confront him, sensing his role in Tommy's death is more than peripheral. With the village holding its breath, she steps out, ready to peel back the artist's mask and uncover what lies beneath. Miss Marple walks to Lilac Cottage, her steps steady despite the weight of her suspicions. The garden is vibrant with roses, but the air feels charged, as if the flowers themselves are watching. She knocks, and Mr. Redding opens the door, his smile as bright as ever, though his eyes flicker with something. Wariness, perhaps. Miss Marple, what a pleasure, he says, ushering her into his studio. Canvases line the walls, landscapes of St. Mary Mead glowing with colour. But one painting, half covered by a cloth, catches her eye. A portrait, unfinished, of a young woman with Elsie's features. Miss Marple files this away, settling into a chair as Redding offers tea. She declines, her gaze steady. I've been thinking about poor Tommy, she says, watching him closely. You knew him, didn't you? Redding's smile falters, but he recovers quickly. Barely, he says, stirring his tea. Just a nod here and there. Miss Marple pulls the letter signed L.R. from her bag, holding it just out of his reach. This suggests otherwise, she says gently. His face tightens, and for a moment the charming artist vanishes, replaced by a man cornered. Where did you get that? He asks, his voice low. Miss Marple explains finding it in Tommy's things, keeping the locker's location vague. Redding leans back, his fingers drumming on the table. Tommy was a nuisance, he admits. He carried messages for me, private ones. He got nosy, started asking for money to keep quiet. Miss Marple's pulse quickens. Blackmail, as she suspected. She presses further, asking what Tommy knew. Redding hesitates, then spins a story. I was helping a friend in London, settling a debt. Tommy delivered a letter about it, then tried to squeeze me for cash. His tone is casual, but his eyes avoid hers. Miss Marple notes the lie. It's too smooth, too rehearsed. She shifts tactics, mentioning the portrait of Elsie. Redding stiffens. Just a study, he says. She's got an interesting face. But his voice betrays a hint of something deeper. Affection or guilt? Miss Marple thanks him and leaves, her mind buzzing. Redding's admission about Tommy's blackmail is a crack in his facade, but it's not the whole truth. Back on Honeysuckle Lane, Miss Marple spots Constable Hurst near the bakery, talking to Mr. Baker. She approaches, catching the tail end of their conversation. No trouble here, Mr. Baker says gruffly, but his hands are clenched. Hurst nods, looking unconvinced, and moves on. Miss Marple lingers, asking Mr. Baker about the ledger she saw in the storeroom. His face reddens. "Just business," he snaps. "Nothing to do with Tommy." But his defensiveness tells her otherwise. The payments to TP weren't for milk. Were they for Tommy's silence too? She wonders if the Bakers knew about Elsie and Redding, and if Tommy's meddling threatened their family. Later, Miss Marple visits the churchyard, seeking a moment of quiet to think. There she finds Reverend Clement tending the graves, his face drawn. She mentions Tommy, probing gently. The vicar sighs. "He was a troubled boy," he says. "Came to me once asking about forgiveness. Said he'd done something wrong, but wouldn't say what." Miss Marple's thoughts turn to Mary, the vicarage maid, who was at the station. Did Tommy confess to her too? She asks the vicar about Mary's mood lately. "She's been jumpy," he admits, "especially since Tommy died." Miss Marple nods, another piece falling into place. Mary, Elsie, Redding, the Bakers, all tied to Tommy, all hiding something. As night falls, Miss Marple returns to her cottage, the letter from LR burning in her mind. Redding's story about a London debt feels flimsy, and his portrait of Elsie suggests a connection Tommy may have exploited. The baker's ledger, the vicar's words, Mary's fear, they all weave a tighter net around Honeysuckle Lane. Miss Marple knows Redding is central, but is he the killer or another pawn? The village is a maze of motives, and she's navigating it alone, aware that each step brings her closer to danger. The truth on Honeysuckle Lane is coming into focus, but the shadows are growing longer. In the next chapter, a late-night discovery at the vicarage will pull Miss Marple deeper into the web, revealing a secret that changes everything. Chapter 7. Whispers in the Vicarage. The moon hangs low over St. Mary Mead, casting a silver glow across Honeysuckle Lane. Miss Jane Marple sits by her cottage window, the faint ticking of her clock, the only sound in the stillness. The letters from Tommy's locker, Mr. Redding's guarded admission, the baker's defensive silence, and Reverend Clement's hint about Tommy's troubled conscience swirl in her mind like leaves in a storm. The vicarage, with its nervous maid Mary and its proximity to the bakery alley, feels like a knot in the mystery's thread. Tonight, Miss Marple senses the answers lie there in the quiet rooms where secrets are whispered. Armed with her sharp instincts, she ventures into the night, determined to uncover what the vicarage hides. Let's follow her as she steps into a web of fear and revelation, where a late-night discovery will shift the puzzle's pieces. Miss Marple slips out of her cottage, her black shawl blending with the shadows. The village is asleep. Its cottage is dark, except for the occasional flicker of a candle. The vicarage looms at the end of the lane, its ivy-covered walls ghostly in the moonlight. She moves silently, her years of quiet observation making her as unobtrusive as a breeze. The vicarage garden, fragrant with roses, borders the alley where Tommy died, and Miss Marple pauses to study the fence. A loose board catches her eye, just wide enough for someone to slip through. Could Mary, or even the vicar, have crossed into the alley that morning unnoticed? She makes a mental note, then approaches the vicarage's back door, which she finds unlocked, a careless oversight in a village now touched by murder. Inside, the kitchen is dark, the air heavy with the scent of polished wood and leftover stew. Miss Marple moves carefully, her eyes adjusting to the dimness. She hears a faint creak from upstairs, followed by the soft thud of footsteps. Her heart quickens, but she remains still, listening. The vicarage is a large house, its rooms filled with the clutter of a busy household. Books, sewing baskets, Griselda's half-finished embroidery. Miss Marple heads to the study, where Reverend Clement keeps his papers, hoping to find a clue about Tommy's confession. The desk is orderly, but a drawer is slightly ajar, as if someone rifled through it in haste. She opens it, revealing a stack of letters, most mundane, parish business, charity requests. But one, tucked beneath the others, is in Tommy's untidy scrawl, addressed to Mary. It's brief. Meet me at the station, midnight. I know what you did. Miss Marple's breath catches. Tommy wasn't just delivering secrets, he was confronting them. Before she can read further, a floorboard creaks behind her. She turns to find Mary, her face pale, clutching a candlestick. "Miss Marple, what are you doing here?" Mary's voice is sharp, her eyes wide with panic. Miss Marple, calm as ever, holds up the letter. "I found this, Mary. It seems Tommy wanted to talk to you." "About what?" Mary's hands tremble, the candlelight flickering. "It's nothing," she stammers. "He was always pestering me." But her voice breaks, and Miss Marple sees fear, not anger in her eyes. Gently she presses. "Did Tommy know something about you, dear? Something you didn't want shared?" Mary's lips part, but no words come. Instead, she bolts from the room, leaving the candle wobbling on the desk. Miss Marple tucks the letter into her bag, knowing she's struck a nerve. She leaves the vicarage, her mind racing. Mary's reaction confirms the letter's importance. But what did Tommy know? Was it tied to Elsie, Redding, or the baker's mysterious payments? The night air is cool as she walks back to Honeysuckle Lane, but she senses she's being watched. A rustle in the hedgerow makes her pause, her hand tightening on her bag. No one emerges, but the feeling lingers. Back in her cottage, she locks the door and sits to examine the letter again. Its words are a threat, plain and simple. Tommy was leveraging something over Mary, but what? Miss Marple recalls Mary's jumpy behaviour at the station, her cryptic words to Elsie in the churchyard. Was Mary involved in Tommy's death, or is she another victim of his schemes? The next morning, Miss Marple visits Griselda, hoping to learn more about Mary's state of mind. The vicar's wife is in the garden, pruning roses with unsteady hands. "Jane, you're up early," Griselda says, her smile strained. Miss Marple mentions the village's unease, steering the conversation to Mary. Griselda sighs. She's been impossible lately, snapping at everyone, dropping things. "I thought it was just her temperament, but since Tommy's death, she's worse." Miss Marple asks if Mary and Tommy were close. Griselda hesitates, then says, "Not close, but he brought her letters sometimes. She'd burn them right after reading." Miss Marple's mind flashes to the letter in her bag. Burning letters suggests secrets, and Mary's panic last night suggests guilt or fear of exposure. Determined to connect the dots, Miss Marple heads to the post office to ask Mrs. Cleet about Mary's mail. The postmistress, ever eager to share, leans over the counter. "Mary got letters all right," she says. "Not often, but they came from London, fancy envelopes. Tommy delivered them, always with a smirk." London again. Redding mentioned a London debt, and now Mary's letters point to the city. Miss Marple thanks Mrs. Cleet and steps outside, her thoughts turning to the photograph from Tommy's locker. Redding in the background, Elsie and Tommy in the foreground. Was Mary connected to this trio in some hidden way? As noon approaches, Miss Marple passes the bakery, where Elsie is sweeping the step, her eyes red-rimmed. Miss Marple pauses, offering a kind word. "You look tired, dear," she says. Elsie nods, her voice barely a whisper. "It's hard with Tommy gone." Miss Marple asks gently if Tommy ever mentioned Mary. Elsie's head snaps up, her face guarded. "He said she was trouble," she murmurs. "Said she was hiding something big." Before Miss Marple can ask more, Mr. Baker calls Elsie inside, his voice sharp. The door slams, and Miss Marple is left with another thread. Mary's secret, whatever it is, was big enough to worry Tommy, and perhaps big enough to kill for. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple lays out her clues. Tommy's letter to Mary, Redding's warning, the baker's ledger, Elsie's fear. The vicarage, once a place of comfort, now feels like a vault of secrets. Mary's panic, Griselda's unease, the loose board by the alley, they all point to a truth just out of reach. Miss Marple knows she's close, but the killer is closer, watching her every move. The village is no longer a haven. It's a battlefield, and she's walking its lines alone. The shadows on Honeysuckle Lane grow deeper as Miss Marple uncovers a web of fear and deceit. In the next chapter, an unexpected visitor will bring a new clue. pushing Miss Marple toward a confrontation that could unravel the entire mystery or put her in the killer's path. Chapter 8. The Unexpected Visitor. The dawn breaks over St. Mary Mead with a soft, rosy light, but the village feels anything but serene. Miss Jane Marple sits in her cosy parlour, the faint hum of morning life filtering through her window. Milk bottles clinking, sparrows chattering, a distant dog barking. Her mind, however, is far from the village's gentle rhythm. The letter from Tommy to Mary, demanding a midnight meeting, sits heavily on her thoughts. Alongside Mr. Redding's evasive answers, Elsie's guarded tears, and the vicarage's air of secrecy, the loose board by the alley and Mary's panicked flight from the study last night, suggest someone in that house knows more than they're saying. Today, an unexpected visitor will arrive on Honeysuckle Lane, bringing a clue that shifts the entire mystery. Let's follow Miss Marple as she navigates this new twist, inching closer to the truth and the danger lurking in St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple begins her morning with a walk to the village shop, hoping to overhear the latest gossip. The shop is busy, with Mrs. Price holding court near the tinned goods, her voice low but eager. "A stranger was seen at the station last night," she whispers to a small crowd. "A man, city type, asking about Tommy." Miss Marple's ears prick up. A stranger? She buys a packet of tea and casually asks Mrs. Price for details. The gossip's eyes gleam. Tall, dark coat, hat pulled low, got off the late train and vanished. Mrs. Cleet saw him. Miss Marple nods, her mind racing. Could this be tied to the London letters Mary received, or Redding's supposed debt? She decides to visit the post office to confirm. Mrs. Cleet, sorting mail behind the counter, is happy to talk. "Oh, I saw him all right," she says, adjusting her glasses. Arrived on the 9:15 train looking shifty, asked if Tommy Pierce still delivered milk here, then left without another word. Miss Marple presses gently, asking if he mentioned anyone else. Mrs. Cleet shakes her head but adds, "He carried a leather case, like a businessman's. Looked out of place in St. Mary Mead." Miss Marple thanks her and steps outside, her thoughts turning to the station. Tommy's locker, the letters, and now a mysterious visitor from London. The threads are tightening, but the pattern remains elusive. Back on Honeysuckle Lane, Miss Marple notices a sleek black car parked outside Lilac Cottage, unusual for Mr. Redding's modest village life. As she passes, the cottage door opens and a man steps out, tall with a dark coat and a hat tilted to shade his face. He carries a leather briefcase, just as Mrs. Cleet described. Redding follows him, his usual charm replaced by a tense frown. The men shake hands, but the gesture feels forced. Miss Marple lingers by a rosebush, pretending to admire it, her ears straining. "Keep it quiet," the stranger says, his voice low and clipped. Redding nods, glancing around but doesn't spot her. The stranger climbs into his car and drives off, leaving a cloud of dust. Miss Marple's pulse quickens. This must be the man from the station, and his connection to Redding suggests trouble. Determined to learn more, Miss Marple knocks on Redding's door. He answers, his face smoothing into a smile, but his eyes are wary. "Miss Marple, twice in 1 week," he says, ushering her inside. The studio smells of turpentine, the half-finished portrait of Elsie still on its easel. She mentions seeing his visitor, framing it as neighbourly curiosity. Redding's smile tightens. "Just an old friend from London," he says. "Business matters." Miss Marple nods, then casually mentions the letter signed LR from Tommy's locker. Redding's hand pauses on a paintbrush. "You're quite the sleuth," he says, his tone light but edged. "That was nothing. Just a note about a commission." Miss Marple senses another lie but doesn't push, instead asking about Elsie. "She's a sweet girl," Redding says too quickly. "I paint her for practice, nothing more." His deflection only deepens her suspicion. Leaving Lilac Cottage, Miss Marple heads to the vicarage, hoping to catch Mary off guard. Griselda answers the door, her face pale, her hands fidgeting with a scarf. "Jane, you're a welcome sight," she says, but her voice trembles. Inside, the vicarage feels tense, the air thick with unspoken worries. Mary is scrubbing pots in the kitchen, her movements jerky. Miss Marple mentions the stranger at the station, watching Mary closely. The maid's sponge slips, splashing water. "Don't know anything about that," she mutters. But her eyes dart to the window. Miss Marple tries a softer approach, asking about Tommy's letters to her. Mary's face hardens. "He was a pest," she says, "always snooping." But her voice cracks, and Miss Marple sees fear again. Fear of what Tommy knew, or of the stranger. As evening falls, Miss Marple visits the bakery, where Mr. Baker is closing up. Elsie is absent, and Mrs. Baker looks exhausted, her apron stained with flour. Miss Marple buys a scone and mentions the stranger, probing for a reaction. Mr. Baker's jaw tightens. "No business of ours," he says, but his eyes flicker to the storeroom. Miss Marple recalls the ledger's payments to TP. Were they tied to this London man? She asks about Elsie's mood and Mrs. Baker sighs. "She's been crying all day. Tommy's death hit her hard." Miss Marple senses more than grief. Guilt, perhaps, or fear of exposure. She leaves, the scone untouched, her mind on Elsie's connection to Reading and the stranger. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple lights a fire and lays out her clues. The letter to Mary, Reading's evasions, the stranger's visit, the baker's secrecy. The stranger's arrival feels like a catalyst, stirring the village's hidden currents. Was he here to silence Tommy, or to collect on Reading's debt? And how do Elsie and Mary fit in? The vicarage's loose board, the alley's proximity, Mary's panic, they all point to a conspiracy, but the motive remains murky. Miss Marple knows the stranger's identity is key, and she suspects Reading knows more than he's saying. The village feels smaller, its familiar faces masking darker truths, and she's aware her questions are drawing attention from someone desperate to stay hidden. The mystery on Honeysuckle Lane is a tangled knot, but Miss Marple's careful hands are pulling it apart. In the next chapter, a return to the train station will uncover a trace of the stranger's purpose, bringing Miss Marple face to face with a truth that could unravel everything or cost her dearly. Chapter 9. Echoes at the Station. The evening sky over St. Mary Mead is streaked with crimson, the village settling into a hush broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. Miss Jane Marple sits by her fire, the warmth doing little to ease the chill of her thoughts. The stranger's visit to Mr. Reading, Mary's fear, the baker's guarded silence, and the letter demanding a midnight meeting all point to a conspiracy woven through Honeysuckle Lane. The train station, where Tommy's locker revealed its secrets, and the mysterious man from London appeared, feels like the epicenter of the mystery. Tonight, Miss Marple returns there, driven by a hunch that the station holds one last clue to unravel Tommy Pierce's death. Let's follow her as she steps into the night, where echoes of the past and a dangerous truth await. Miss Marple wraps herself in a dark shawl, her movements quiet as she slips out of her cottage. The village is asleep, its cottages dim under the starlit sky. The station, a short walk from Honeysuckle Lane, stands like a forgotten sentinel, its platform empty and its lockers silent witnesses to Tommy's secrets. She carries a small torch, its beam cutting through the darkness as she approaches the lockers. The one Tommy used is still unlocked, its contents now in her possession, but she wonders if she missed something. She checks the surrounding lockers, her fingers tracing their cold metal surfaces. The fifth locker, stiff with rust, resists her key, but yields after a gentle jiggle. Inside, she finds a single item, a crumpled train ticket, dated the day before Tommy's death, for a return trip to London. The ticket is a revelation. Tommy, a village milkman, rarely left St. Mary Mead. Why London, and why so close to his death? Miss Marple tucks the ticket into her bag, her mind racing. Was he meeting the stranger? or delivering something tied to Redding's debt. She scans the platform, her torch sweeping the shadows. A glint near the tracks catches her eye, a silver cigarette case, half buried in the gravel. She picks it up, noting its monogram, C.W. Not Tommy's, nor Redding's. She recalls no one in the village with those initials. But the case feels significant, perhaps dropped by the stranger. She pockets it, aware that lingering too long risks discovery. As she turns to leave, a faint crunch of gravel stops her. She douses her torch and presses against the station wall, her heart steady but alert. A figure moves in the darkness, pausing by the lockers. It's too dim to see clearly, but the silhouette is slight. Mary, perhaps. The figure tests a locker, then slips away toward the village. Miss Marple waits, then follows at a distance, her steps silent on the grass verge. The figure heads toward the vicarage, disappearing through the garden gate. Miss Marple doesn't pursue, but the encounter confirms her suspicions. Someone is still searching for Tommy's secrets, and the vicarage is at the heart of it. The next morning, Miss Marple visits the village library, a small room tucked behind the hall, to research the cigarette case's initials. The librarian, Miss Weatherby, a meticulous woman with a love for local history, helps her comb through old directories. They find no C.W. in St. Mary Mead. But Miss Weatherby recalls a London businessman, Charles Worth, who visited the village last year for a charity event at the vicarage. Tall, dark-haired, always smoking, she says. Miss Marple's pulse quickens. Could this be the stranger? She asks about Worth's connections, and Miss Weatherby mentions he dealt in art, often meeting with collectors like Mr. Redding. The pieces align. Redding's London friend, the stranger's briefcase, Tommy's trip to London. Determined to test this link, Miss Marple visits Lilac Cottage again. Mr. Redding is in his garden, sketching, his face guarded as she approaches. She mentions the cigarette case, watching his reaction. Found it at the station, she says lightly. Monogram C.W. Know anyone like that? Redding's pencil snaps, his eyes narrowing. No idea, he says too quickly. Probably a tourist's. But his hands betray him, fidgeting with the sketchbook. Miss Marple shifts to the train ticket, asking if Tommy ever mentioned London. Redding's jaw tightens. He ran errands for me sometimes, he admits. Picked up supplies, that's all. His evasions are fraying, and Miss Marple senses he's protecting someone, or himself. Later, she stops by the bakery, where Elsie is stacking loaves, her movements slow and weary. Miss Marple asks about Tommy's travels, mentioning the ticket. Elsie's face pales. He went to London once, she says softly. Said he had business, wouldn't tell me what. Her voice cracks, and Miss Marple sees guilt in her eyes. Was Elsie part of Tommy's scheme, or a victim of it? She doesn't press, but as she leaves, Mr. Baker watches from the storeroom, his gaze hard. The ledger's payments to TP loom in her mind. Were they tied to Tommy's London trip? Back at her cottage, Miss Marple lays out the ticket and cigarette case beside the letters. The stranger, likely Charles Worth, connects Redding, Tommy, and possibly Mary. Was Tommy delivering art, money, or secrets for Redding? Did he cross Worth, or stumble into something bigger? The figure at the station, Mary, she's certain, suggests the maid is still hiding something. The vicarage, the bakery, Lilac Cottage, they're all points on a map leading to Tommy's killer. Miss Marple knows she's close, but the station's echoes warn her. The truth is dangerous, and someone is desperate to keep it buried. The net around Honeysuckle Lane is tightening, and Miss Marple's quiet persistence is drawing out the killer's shadow. In the final chapter, a confrontation in the alley will bring the truth to light, forcing Miss Marple to face the murderer, and a choice that could change St. Mary Mead forever. If you're loving this mystery, hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us. Chapter 10. The Truth in the Alley. The dawn creeps over St. Mary Mead, casting a pale light on Honeysuckle Lane, where the village's secrets have festered like weeds. Miss Jane Marple sits in her parlour, the The clues of the past days spread before her like a finished puzzle. Tommy's letters, the train ticket, the cigarette case monogrammed CW, Mary's panic, Elsie's guilt, Redding's lies, and the baker's hidden payments. The stranger, likely Charles Worth, ties them all to a web of deceit that led to Tommy Pierce's death. The bakery alley, where it all began, calls her back. She knows the truth waits there, in the shadows where Tommy fell. Tonight, Miss Marple will stage a final confrontation, drawing the killer into the open. Let's follow her as she unravels the mystery of Honeysuckle Lane, revealing every secret and facing the murderer head-on. If you're gripped by this tale, grab a cup of tea, take a seat, and join us for the end. Then hit that subscribe button, as your support means the world. Miss Marple begins her day with a plan, her mind as sharp as the knitting needles she sets aside. She sends a note to Constable Hurst, asking him to meet her at the bakery alley at dusk, hinting at new evidence. She then visits the vicarage, where Griselda is arranging flowers, her hands unsteady. Miss Marple mentions the cigarette case, watching Griselda's reaction. "Charles Worth, wasn't he a friend of the vicar's?" she asks lightly. Griselda's vase slips, shattering on the floor. "Just a donor," she stammers, but her eyes betray fear. Miss Marple asks for Mary, but Griselda says the maid is out. The lie is clear. Mary's shoes, muddy from the station, sit by the door. Miss Marple leaves, certain the vicarage holds the final key. Next, she stops by Lilac Cottage, where Mr. Redding is packing canvases, his movements hurried. "Leaving so soon?" Miss Marple asks, her tone gentle but probing. Redding's smile is strained. "Just a trip to London," he says, but his packed bags suggest otherwise. She mentions the train ticket and Charles Worth. Redding's face hardens. "Tommy was a fool," he snaps. "Got greedy, messed with the wrong people." He stops short, realizing his slip. Miss Marple presses, asking about the portrait of Elsie. Red Caminar's jaw clenches. "She was amused, nothing more," he says, but his voice wavers. Miss Marple thanks him and leaves, her suspicions confirmed. Redding's tied to Worth and Tommy's death. At the bakery, Elsie is alone, her eyes red from crying. Miss Marple shows her the love note from Tommy's locker. Elsie breaks down, sobbing. "He loved me, but I couldn't," she whispers. "I was with someone else." She won't name the man, but Miss Marple guesses. Redding. She asks about the ledger's payments to TP. Elsie hesitates, then admits, "Father paid Tommy to keep quiet about me and Leonard. Tommy saw us together, threatened to tell." Miss Marple's heart sinks. Blackmail again. But was it enough to kill? She asks if Elsie saw anyone in the alley that morning. Elsie shakes her head, but her trembling hands suggest she's holding back. As dusk falls, Miss Marple heads to the alley, the air thick with the scent of honeysuckle and tension. Constable Hurst waits, his notebook ready. She's invited Redding, Mary, Elsie, and the Bakers, claiming she's found Tommy's killer. They arrive, uneasy, their faces lit by the fading light. Miss Marple begins, her voice calm but firm. "Tommy Pierce was no innocent," she says. "He carried secrets, blackmailed those he served. He knew about Elsie and Mr. Redding's affair, demanded money from the Bakers to stay quiet." Elsie gasps. Redding's face pales, and Mr. Baker clenches his fists. Miss Marple continues, holding up the cigarette case. "Charles Worth, a London art dealer, came to St. Mary Mead. Tommy delivered messages for him and Redding, messages about stolen art, sold through Redding's connections." Redding interrupts, his voice sharp. "That's nonsense," but Miss Marple holds up the letter signed LR, warning Tommy to keep quiet. "You wrote this, Mr. Redding. Tommy was your courier, but he got greedy, threatened to expose your dealings with Worth." She turns to Mary, who's trembling. "And you, Mary, received letters from Worth, didn't you? About a past you wanted buried." Mary's eyes widen. "Tommy knew I ran from London," she whispers. "I stole from Worth years ago. He found me here, used Tommy to threaten me." Miss Marple nods, the pieces falling into place. She turns to the alley, pointing to the loose board by the vicarage. Someone slipped through here the morning Tommy died. Mary, you were in the alley, weren't you? Mary sobs, shaking her head. I didn't kill him! I swear. Miss Marple's gaze shifts to Redding. But you did, Mr. Redding. Tommy threatened to expose your art scheme to Worth, who was here that night. You met Tommy in the alley, argued, and pushed him. The milk bottle broke in the fall, but you made it look like an accident. Redding's face twists, his charm gone. You can't prove it, he snarls. But Constable Hurst steps forward, cuffs ready. Miss Marple reveals the final clue, the crushed daisy from the alley, matching the ones in Redding's garden. You stepped on it as you fled, she says. Redding lunges, but Hurst restrains him. Mary collapses, confessing she saw the push but stayed silent, fearing Worth's wrath. Elsie admits she knew of Tommy's blackmail but couldn't speak, torn by guilt. The Bakers, shamed, admit to the payments, desperate to protect Elsie's reputation. Charles Worth, Miss Marple explains, left the cigarette case in his haste, tying him to Redding's scheme, but not the murder. As Redding is led away, the village exhales, the weight of secrets lifting. Miss Marple returns to her cottage, her knitting resumed, the puzzle complete. Tommy's greed cost him his life, and Redding's desperation sealed his fate. Mary, Elsie, and the Bakers will carry their guilt, but St. Mary Mead is safe again, for now. Miss Marple knows human nature never changes, and another mystery may lurk around the corner. The truth on Honeysuckle Lane is laid bare, thanks to Miss Marple's quiet brilliance. If you've loved this journey, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive. Stay tuned for more mysteries from St. Mary Mead.